Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And today we're happy to share with you the first ever Bible discussion. And since this is a beginning of sorts, we're going to start at the beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis. But before we jump into the text, let's do some introductions, and I'll start. I'm Timothy Klingerman, and I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering, a Master of Arts degree in Biblical Studies, and for the last 35 years, I've been teaching Bible classes, leading small groups, and occasionally preaching. I am a husband. I'm the father of 3 sons and a grandfather. And my oldest son, Caleb, is here with me. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, like Dad said, I'm Caleb Klingerman. I have a Bachelor of Arts in History. I have a lifelong interest in religious and philosophical, theological study. My thinking has been shaped heavily by G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and other writers. I'm also a husband and a father. I have a little girl at home, and I'm excited to be a part of this podcast where we study the most important document of all time, the Bible.
So let's go ahead and get started on our discussion of beginnings, and I'll start by asking you, Caleb, do you know the first verse of the Bible from memory?
I do. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Well, that's a relief, because if you hadn't known that, I would have felt like a bad parent. But speaking of that, I think, when you think about this generation and their lack of knowledge of the Bible, it would be easy to blame your generation and say, well, you guys just never studied the Bible. But in reality, it would be the fault of my generation for not teaching it to you. So if we have a problem, maybe we should jump back a generation and talk about that.
I think that's partially true. I think a lot of people, because I constantly, probably to the annoyance of some of my peers, like to start conversations about controversial and important things. And I talk to a lot of people about their beliefs. I think most people that I talk to want to believe in something. It's kind of like in National Treasure when Nicolas Cage's character, they're talking about the Declaration of Independence, and somebody says nobody believes that stuff anymore, and he says, but they want to believe it. And I think that's true of God. I think a lot of people want to believe in God, but they haven't been taught. You could say it's the fault of those who had the responsibility of teaching them.
Well, yeah, I mean, just that first verse of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's amazing to consider what the world would be like today if everybody believed that. What a difference that would make in the world. Just that first sentence in the Bible. But maybe I'd like today to simplify it and take it back to just the first word in the Bible.
You mean in?
Well, in English it would be in, but I was referring to the first Hebrew word in the Bible. And you get bonus points if you know what that word is, Caleb.
Then I am without bonus points.
The first word in Hebrew in the Bible is Bereshit. And that is typically translated as in the beginning. It's also the title of the book that's used by Hebrew speakers. And so God had to open his love letter to all mankind, the Bible, and he had to very carefully pick the very first thing he would say. And he would want to pick something that would keep you reading, right? It would have been very carefully chosen. And it would be arguably the most important thing he could say. And what he wanted to tell us was that he was there in the beginning. So I think that's significant. What do you think?
I would agree. I think more than that, he is the beginning. He's the source of everything, because it says after that, it says he created the heavens and the earth. And the Bible will go on to echo that repeatedly. He'll refer to himself as the Alpha and the Omega, which is the beginning and the end, the first two, or the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. He calls himself the beginning. John will echo it in multiple of the books he wrote, but in the beginning of the Gospel of John, it says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So I think it's definitely significant since he emphasizes it in more than just the first, just in Genesis.
Yeah, sure. And my point too is that, I think he wanted us to understand that he had a unique perspective. There's no one else in the world who could claim that they were there in the beginning. There's no one else you could go to and ask them what happened, because he was the only one who was there. So you have that unique perspective, and the Bible represents the collective wisdom of God, who has been there since the beginning, watching the history of humankind unfold. So you have this incredible wealth of knowledge that you can benefit from this God who has seen everything and recorded it for us so that we can learn the lessons of all time. And I think, even if you didn't believe in God, and you didn't believe that he wrote the Bible, and you didn't even believe that he created the world, you could still look at the Bible, the text itself, and say, here's a document that I can benefit from because it represents such a long history of knowledge. What do you think?
So you're saying even if somebody doesn't believe in God necessarily, that they would find it valuable. I think a lot of people would take issue with that, right? I mean, certainly an atheist would, or somebody from another religion. You can definitely make the argument that, at the very least, what the Bible represents is a collection of texts, experiences and wisdom and customs that came down through, hundreds or thousands of years, generation after generation, passing on, wisdom for the next generations to learn. Like we were talking earlier about, maybe previous recent generations haven't done a good job of passing those things on to future generations. But you could say the same thing about any religion, really. You could say the same thing about the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, Hindu texts. So what would set apart the Bible compared to those texts?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it has stood the test of time. It's been valued by multiple cultures. It's been the basis for Western civilization. But I guess what I was trying to get to is in just the first word, that first Hebrew word, it demonstrates that we don't exist in a generational bubble. Like we were talking about whether my generation did a good job training your generation and whatnot, but we're not just in that one generational bubble. I think a lot of people think, well, I start out with a blank slate and I can figure everything out much better than the last generation did or previous generations because I'm a smart guy. And I look at what's around me and I make my decisions, and those decisions are independent of all of this stuff that's in the Bible. But we don't start out with a blank slate, I don't think. And, they aren't arbitrary rules in the Bible that we can just decide to toss aside with no consequences just because we don't understand them yet. We haven't taken the time or haven't the experience to understand why those lessons are in the Bible. Of course, we can toss them aside if we want to, but that can be catastrophic. In fact, it can have catastrophes of biblical proportions when we do that. And that's what the stories in the Bible in many cases are recording, is what happens when people toss aside those time-honored values and traditions and divinely inspired traditions and teachings, I believe. But, they aren't just arbitrary rules. And so here they are collected in this biblical text. And I'll ask you, because you're the historian and, you're also a dad now. So like, what are the lessons from the last few centuries, say, that you think everybody should learn, or especially your kids, you would want them to learn? what are the lessons of the recent past, and why are they important?
Well, I like what you said earlier about that. A lot of people today think, well, I'm a smart guy, I'm a blank slate. I can figure out as I go, piece together the truth and the meaning of life. We are smart people, whether you think God made us smart or we've just developed that way by accident. We are smart people, and one of the first things you should realize as a smart person is that you don't and you can't know everything. So to some extent, you're going to have to rely on, like Albert Einstein said, he stood on the shoulders of giants. You know, and there's a quote I like from G.K. Chesterton. He says that I don't know by what great mental accident modern writers have equated the idea of progress with independent thinking. Independent thinking is obviously the antithesis of progress, because with independent thinking, every man has to start from the beginning, and more likely than not, will get no farther than his father did before him. And if there's any notion of progress, it has to come with the careful study and assumption of the whole past. And what he's saying is, in order to progress, you would have to start from a point and keep moving forward. But if every single one of us has to start from zero, we'll never get past whatever the smartest person to ever live is. That's as far as any one of us could hope to get. And the rest of us would have to start over. And obviously, that's not what we want. We would want what a civilization is, what a philosophical or religious tradition is a series, of generations of thinkers building off of each other. And so when you decide to depart from that, you tear everything down and go back to ground zero to get to some of the historical lessons. Obviously, the Bible warns against this, and there are events in the Bible, and it is a historical text. Whether you believe it came from God or not, you do have to look at this as some of the events are confirmed archaeologically. Some of them might be, at the very least would be, meaningful legends people told. But there are events where, the Israelites turn from God and they all get taken into captivity by Babylon or Persia. And there are, in more recent history, like you were asking, some of the things I would want to teach my daughter and any other future children I have. You look at the French Revolution. The French were many of the revolutionaries were so obsessed with getting away from the monarchy and anything that was related to it that they threw away religion. They didn't want anything to do with the Catholic Church or any other organized religion. Some of them took it so far that they began a cult called the Cult of Reason, and they would, they tried to develop ceremonies and things and practices to worship the goddess of reason, which, when you reach the point that you're so anti-religion that you invent a new religion, something has clearly gone wrong.
Yeah.
Not to mention the anarchy that took hold of France at that time. There was basically no law and order in the countryside. It wasn't safe to travel. There were just armed robbers and bandits roaming free. You weren't safe there, and you weren't safe in the cities because whoever was in power could only hope to keep power with an iron hand. So, Robespierre instituted the Reign of Terror, for example, beheaded tens of thousands of people who posed any type of potential threat to the state. And, everything broke down. More recently, in the 20th century, we have totalitarian states like the Nazis or the Soviets or Maoist China, which were all, the Soviets and China were avowedly a-religious. They didn't want any influence from religion. The Nazis used religious rhetoric, but what they said was that they were in their official, in their constitution, in their laws, they said that they would permit any religion that upheld German morals and, what was for the good of the German people. Well, they were the ones who got to decide what that meant. And so as a result, you had, obviously, any Jewish religious leaders were already going to be under fire from the Nazis. But you also had priests and pastors of Catholic or Protestant backgrounds, especially Catholic. There was a specific camp in Dachau where there were 2,500 Catholic priests in a concentration camp because they refused to bend the knee to the regime and they stood for what they believed. So, yes, absolutely. when a culture is willing to just break from its tradition like that, they don't have anything left to stand on, and everyone does have to go back to zero, and it creates complete chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to listen to you talk about these things because we can't pretend that these things never happened, and we can't pretend that we're not capable of repeating them. We are just as capable of others who have made the same mistakes, of repeating those mistakes, and that's why we write history books. We try to capture the stories of the terrible stories of our recent past and our distant past, and we try to provide commentary on how we can best learn from the mistakes that were made, and from those atrocities. So something good could possibly come from it is maybe we won't repeat it again. The Bible represents the same effort over a much longer period of time. And, a lot of the examples that are in there are not good. Sometimes it's difficult. You read in the Old Testament some of these things that are happening in the catastrophes that occur for entire nations of peoples, and it's because of the mistakes that were made. And so you can't always moralize from what happens in biblical narrative or in history, but you can learn a lesson from it. Even though people made bad choices, and we can learn not to make them again.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest lies that idea of progress will tell you, is that we won't make the same mistakes. We're going to do it perfectly this time. Well, that's not how people work. So the whole point of tradition, Chesterton calls it. I think there's multiple people who make this point one way or another, but Chesterton talks about that the dead vote with their traditions. Tradition is the democracy of the dead. So, people came before us, made mistakes, and learned from them, and tried to pass down wisdom in their religions, their philosophy, their political institutions. And it's not always perfect, and sometimes it may need change, but you don't just throw it away wholesale, because there are mistakes to learn from there. And if you forget it, then, what do we say? Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Well, and when we ignore all those lessons, right, we just make our own lives that much harder. So
yeah, and it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, that it's the responsibility of those who, especially the older generation, those who have the wisdom, who have made the mistakes, or who have studied the history. It's their responsibility to pass it on to the next generation, to inculcate, respect for and understanding of traditions, because it's not enough to do it blindly. If you don't know what it means, that's as good as forgetting it. But to actually learn what's behind it. So that's important. Why that's a reason why I would want to teach my children about the Bible and about history. The fact that the first word in the Bible is in the beginning, or Bereshit, is a reminder that history goes back before even we do, before humanity. So we have to be aware that there's a God who stands before that, because he's the only one who has witnessed the whole stretch of history, the only one who is, if you want to call it a blank slate. He has actually, as history's gone along, he's been there and witnessed it all. The rest, the democracy of the dead, they all they can give us are the traditions, but God is still with us today.
Yeah, when you look at that perspective on time that God has, I think I've told you about this before, but whenever I was in high school, I was studying in my Bible, and I saw some of these passages about predetermination. God knowing what the ends of certain people's lives would be, and
that's always a doozy.
Yeah, so I went to my dad and I asked him about it, and he told me this analogy he had about the mountainous paths. I think, have I shared that with you before?
I'll bet that you have, but I don't remember it. So sometimes it is the fault of the younger generation.
Well, my dad's analogy was that if you look at all of time, and how we're trapped in time right where we are. We're like a mountainous or traveler on a mountainous path, and you can only see as far ahead as the next curve in the path. The next rise in the on the hill. You can't see over it. There's trees in the forest, and you can't see into the forest. So you don't know what's ahead. You don't know if there's a fork in the path. You don't know whether to take the high road or the low road. You don't know which one has wild animals, criminals, a precipice or a sheer drop off or whatever may be there, any kind of danger. And you don't know which one leads to the destination you're trying to get to. And so you go down this path and you're just making your best guess sometimes. But if you consider the perspective of God, if you consider him above the mountain with a bird's eye view down on the top, from the top, and he can see all the paths simultaneously all the way around the mountain. So if you're, traveling this path, he knows you're going to go the wrong direction or the right direction to get where you wanted to go. So that's the perspective that he has. And so it's advantageous to us to listen to him and to try to learn, his wisdom so that you make the best choices when you're traveling down the paths. Now that's one way of looking at it. And there are people who also teach that, well, God is inside of time just like we are, that you can't make a square circle, and just like God can't make a square circle, he can't exist outside of time. And some of those folks would say that he's super smart and super powerful, and he works inside of time just like we do, but he does it much more successfully. And so in either way you look at it, because I don't know if it's knowable, for us, which way is it? But God knows. But if you look at it that way, he still has a better perspective than we do. And so we should probably listen to him.
Yeah. I think with like the mountainous path analogy, you could also add to that, that the people who have gone before you, the travelers who have gone before you, will have left signs or maps or footprints you can follow. But somebody who has like a modern idea of progress would want to ignore all that and try to go it alone. And I always think of God as, I probably do think of him more as being outside of time. I picture him as an author of a book because I read and write a lot. My favorite role models are all authors. I think of him as he has time laid out as a manuscript of a book he's writing, and we're all, we're the characters, and we're only there for a couple pages, but he's got the whole thing. He can flip to any page he wants, and he can, something he's writing in my life, he can go back and foreshadow that in Scripture, and and vice versa, and he can go anywhere he wants. But if you're on page 12, you're stuck there. You can't jump to 112.
Yeah, I think most people have that view that God is outside of time, that he created time, and so therefore not bound by it. I only mentioned the other view because it's a popular one. I think best stated or best expressed in Clark Pinnock's book, The Openness of God, which is an interesting read if anybody is interested in that topic. But if you think about it, this, what you said about seeing where somebody had gone before, that's kind of how we make maps, And I think, my dad's analogy of the mountainous paths and the bird's eye view that God has and all that would be summed up pretty good, by map making by people who've already been there too. But maybe the more modern analogy, though, would be the GPS satellite system. With GPS, we have this amazing capability where we can pinpoint our location, and we have maps built into our phones and into servers on the internet that will look at our exact location. Our devices that we hold in our hands pinpoint our location, send it back to the servers, and the servers calculate even our direction of travel and speed. They can tell us if there's a traffic jam up ahead and reroute our travel so we aren't delayed, excessively. It's just amazing technology, and it's only possible because we have a series of satellites, a network of satellites that are 12,550 miles over our heads, looking down at the Earth.
Such a specific number.
Yeah, well, has to be so that they hold their position.
Yeah,
in
the engineer would know,
like geosynchronous orbit or whatever they call it. So anyway, but it's a remarkable achievement for mankind that we've been able to accomplish this, I think, and yet we take it completely for granted, because we have our smartphones, we have our network connectivity everywhere we go, and everything's updated in real time. And we take it for granted. But I think, that gets us back to this first word in the Bible, Bereshit, in the beginning. God has a unique perspective that we've just taken for granted. Not that long ago, but a couple hundred years ago, we founded our country on the concepts in the Bible. We based our laws on it. We based our culture on it, that biblical model, and it just worked. It just worked for us. But now, we've sort of forgotten the basis for our success. And I think, you think about us being arrogant as human beings in our capabilities. We just assume that, well, of course we were able to develop the GPS satellite system because we're brilliant guys. We're brilliant people.
Just like we can start from scratch and figure everything out.
Yeah. We have the kind of brilliance that creates a system like that. And that it's our successfulness and our brilliance, that makes it all happen. And we conveniently forget that the foundations of our society, is this biblical model. And it fostered a society that could produce this kind of brilliance, this kind of success. That this ancient book laid the foundation for these kinds of modern technologies and wisdom. So in this first episode, Bible discussions, what we want to say is that we don't take the Word of God for granted. That it is the unique perspective of God. It's an ancient perspective with divine wisdom. We want to use these discussions that we're going to have over time here to mine that ancient record for wisdom for living today. And hopefully this first episode has been successful in making that point. And I just said a whole lot of stuff. So what do you think about all that?
I think it's a very good point that, like, for example, the brilliance that led us to design the GPS is actually founded on, biblical values in Christianity, because the first scientists were Christians. Probably Isaac Newton is the best person you can point to as the first scientist. And he and others like him early on, they reasoned that if God is a rational God and he designed the universe according to logic and and with purpose and meaning behind it, then they reasoned we could examine it and through time and study we could come to understand it because it would function logically, or at least understand portions of it at a time. And that's where the scientific method developed from. So that is a good point. That even all the things we enjoy in modernity that we've come to take for granted were founded in a biblical worldview that we've also taken for granted. I would caution, like for example, you said we founded the United States on biblical values, and it just worked. I would say that you can just like you can be arrogant in your own brilliance without any need for God. You can also be arrogant in your own brilliance because of your faith in God. You can be the Pharisee who prays, God, thank you for not making me like this tax collector over here, and be proud of your own, self-righteous and proud of your own faith. But that's ultimately your faith is in yourself. So I would say the true key is humility, to humble yourself, to to God, and let Him guide you instead of you trying to use Him for your ends. And ultimately, that's what Bereshit, or in the beginning, would do to somebody who reads it with an open heart. Would be humbling to realize, like we were saying, there's a perspective that goes all the way back to the beginning, that precedes your life story, that precedes all history, and it would put you in that position to be humbled before God before reading the rest of the text.
Yeah, I think I'm going to let you have the final word with that, because you summed it all up pretty good. You got us all the way back to the word Bereshit in the beginning, and very, very well said. So we'll wrap it up with that, and we'll thank everybody for joining us on this first episode of Bible Discussions. He's Caleb, and I'm Timothy, and you've been listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica, Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2024 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.